Now to Chicago, where a man who set fire to a woman on a train has been ordered to remain in custody. An unidentified 26-year-old woman was riding on a public train earlier this week. She was seated and scrolling on her phone when a man came up to her, poured gasoline over her head and her body. Then, as she ran away, the man lit fire to a container he was holding and tossed it at her, setting her on fire. He then stood back and watched her as her body was engulfed in flames. The woman is miraculously alive and recovering in the hospital, and this wasn't some random accidental burning, if such a thing could ever exist. Prosecutors say this was as premeditated as it gets, that the 50-year-old, a man named Lawrence Reed, allegedly went to a gas station just minutes before the attack. Surveillance video shows him buying and filling up a container of gasoline. He then boards a train, apparently looking for a victim. This attack is getting nationwide attention, not just because it's so heinous, but because it was totally avoidable. Lawrence Reed had been arrested more than 70 times. Not 17, we're talking 70. He was convicted in 13 of those cases for battery and arson. Even the city's mayor was shocked at how monumental this failure was to keep him behind bars, both by the city and by the judicial system.
This is an absolute failure of our criminal justice as well as our mental health institutions. This individual was charged with dozens of felonies over the past 3 decades. The system that we had failed to intervene.
Lawrence Reed will now finally stay locked up and faces charges of terrorism. But it's a story we hear about all too often. It was barely 2 months ago when another young woman on a train was murdered while minding her own business. Irina Zarutska was stabbed to death in Charlotte, North Carolina. That crime also committed by a repeat offender with a documented long mental health history. Joining me now is Keith Humphreys. He's a professor of psychiatry at Stanford University and was a drug policy advisor for Presidents Obama and Bush. Also joining me is Manhattan Institute senior fellow Rafael Mangual. Rafael, I'm going to start with you. 70 arrests, 13 felony convictions. Why was this guy still on the street?
Well, he was still on the street because a lot of our policymakers have made the fundamental error of committing to decarceration for its own sake. I know that these stories are very shocking to the people that hear them when they hear a number like that. But, really, that's the uninitiated. To people who have been following this issue closely, this is not out of the realm of sort of usual course of business. We have dozens of people who are constantly churning their way through the court system every single day who have criminal histories that are just as troubling. What we've failed to do as a society is to draw a line in the sand as to repeated criminal offending and say beyond this point, no more.
Keith, this comes as there has been an increasing call in taking people who are clearly mentally ill, who are clearly addicted to drugs. We don't know in this case if this man was either one of those or both of those, but we do know he was a repeat offender. Do you think this is going to add more momentum now to that push that we all, those of us who live and work in urban areas, can be walking down the street and see people who clearly shouldn't be on the street?
Yeah, I think it will add momentum, and it should. I mean, the good news is most people who are seriously mentally ill are not violent. They're far more likely to actually be victims of violence than to be violent. The bad news is there is a subpopulation of people who are a threat to public safety, and the profile is, mentally ill, overwhelmingly male, usually long years of contact with the criminal justice system and the mental health system that has failed, and very frequently substance use, particularly alcohol, crack cocaine, methamphetamine, drugs that are linked to aggression. And we have failed to deal with this population, we being both the mental health system and the criminal justice system.
Rafael, you were just testifying before Congress this week, calling on Congress to consider passing a bill that would enforce stronger penalties for repeat offenders. What are the chances that'll happen?
I mean, it's hard to say, and one of the reasons that it's hard to say is because the politics of this issue have long been very fraught, right? The reality
fraught with
is,
what? Doesn't everybody want somebody who's been arrested 70 times to not be walking the streets freely to set fire to women on trains?
You would think so, but the reality is that many Democrats in this country have fundamentally opposed measures that would have taken people like this off the street. They have opposed measures like pretrial release policies that create rebuttable presumptions of detention for people with lengthy criminal histories. They have opposed, three strikes regimes or habitual offender statutes that subject individuals who have repeated run-ins with the criminal justice system to lengthy sentencing enhancements. These are the answers to the problems that we are all upset about. But the reality is that there are a few people who are political leaders who just refuse to go down this road. And it is long past time for them to have to answer for the why. Why is it a good idea to have somebody who's been through the system this many times out on the street? I've yet to hear a good answer for that. And yet we see these cases. I mean, these two cases that you're talking about are, they're recent, but they're not outliers. We see this time.
The Daniel Penny story here in New York City involved a man who had assaulted people repeatedly on the New York City subway, who was acting in a threatening manner, and who had a documented history of mental illness. I mean, it's just, and we see in many of these big cities, whether it's Chicago, whether it's New York City, whether it's Los Angeles, San Francisco, many of these people use public transit settings because they don't have any place else to go, and especially in the winter, that's the only place that's warm.
Exactly right. That's exactly right. And as I told Congress, if you look at these major cities around the country, right, if you look at Chicago, the average number of prior arrests that a shooting or homicide suspect has is 12. In Washington, D.C., it's 11. In Baltimore, Maryland, it's 9. It's 10 in Oakland, California. I mean, go city by city, and what you'll find is that the repeat offender problem is a real one, and it's long past time that we deal with it.
Keith, what do you make of that? Do you think legislation fixes this issue, or is it a matter of not having the facilities to treat people who have mental health issues? And in the case of the man in the Charlotte, North Carolina train stabbing incident, his own mother tried to involuntarily commit him to a mental health hospital and didn't succeed, wasn't able to do so.
Yeah, we need changes both in law and in the available facilities, and it has to be done state by state because that's actually where most of criminal justice and mental health in this country are based. I think 80% of the country gets this, but the people who fight this issue include a lot who see this fundamentally different, I think, the way I do or the way Rafael does, that they think that somebody is, this is a gross attack on individual liberty to constrain somebody, maybe pressure them into treatment or require treatment because that's who they are and they're being who they are. And as I look at it, as a professor of psychiatry, they're ill. They don't have their freedom, and they should be pressured into treatment so they can restore their reason, which is the root of our liberty.
Yeah, seeing some of the mentally ill people that I see on the streets here in New York City, it feels inhumane to let them live this way, even though they might not want help. I don't know. Very tough. Thank you both, gentlemen, Rafael Mangual, Keith Humphrey, for joining us on this really difficult topic. I appreciate it.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.